What if I told you there was an Olympic marathon where runners got chased by wild dogs, drank rat poison, took naps mid-race, and one guy literally hitchhiked for 11 miles? Welcome to the 1904 St. Louis Olympics Marathon, a race so chaotic it makes modern reality television look boring. This wasn't just a marathon, it was a survival horror game disguised as a sporting event. We're talking about a race where the winner was actually disqualified for cheating. Another guy nearly died from drinking industrial chemicals. And the whole thing was organized by people who apparently thought athlete safety was just a suggestion. Today we're diving into the most cursed Olympic event ever, proof that sometimes the Olympics can be more dangerous than actual war zones. Picture this, it is 1904, and the Olympics are being held in St. Louis, Missouri. But here's the first red flag. These Olympics were basically an afterthought tacked onto the World's Fair like a discount sideshow. The Olympic organizers had about as much experience running international sporting events as a McDonald's manager has running NASA. The marathon was scheduled for the 30th of August, and the weather was absolutely brutal. We're talking 90 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity that felt like breathing through a wet towel. Modern marathon organizers would take one look at these conditions and say, absolutely not. But 1904 organizers, they said, perfect weather for a nice jog. The course itself was a 24.85-mile nightmare designed by someone who clearly hated human beings. It included steep hills, dusty roads, and exactly one water station at the 12-mile mark. One, for comparison. Modern marathons have water stations every 2-3 miles because, humans need water to survive. But wait, it gets worse. The race director, James Sullivan, had this brilliant idea to turn the marathon into a scientific experiment about human endurance. This guy basically treated Olympic athletes like lab rats, deliberately withholding water to see what would happen. It is like if someone decided to test how long people could hold their breath by throwing them in the ocean. The starting line had 32 runners from around the world, including some guys who had literally never run a marathon before. One participant was a mailman from Cuba who showed up in street clothes and leather shoes. Another was a South African who had been running from wild animals his whole life, which as it turns out was actually perfect training for this race. The whole setup screamed disaster waiting to happen, but everyone just shrugged and said, let's see what happens. Spoiler alert, what happened was absolute chaos. The contestants, a cast of characters straight out of a comedy. Let's meet our players in this Olympic disaster movie. First up, we have Felix Carvajal, a Cuban mailman who literally fundraised his way to St. Louis by running demonstration races in Havana. This absolute legend showed up to the Olympics wearing street clothes, a beret and leather shoes right before the race. Someone had to cut off his pants with scissors to make them into shorts. Imagine showing up to the Olympics looking like you are about to deliver mail, not run 26 miles. Then we have the Tswana tribesmen from South Africa, Jan Mashiani and Len Tanyane. These guys have been chased by wild animals their entire lives, so they figured an Olympic marathon would be a nice, relaxing change of pace. Spoiler, they were wrong, but their animal dodging skills would come in handy. Or American favorites included Thomas Hicks, a brass worker from Massachusetts who was basically the early 1900s equivalent of a weekend warrior. His support team had a brilliant strategy involving rat poison and brandy, because apparently they thought the best way to fuel an athlete was with literal toxins. There was also Arthur Newton, another American who was so confident he'd win that he basically treated the first half of the race like a casual warm-up jog. This guy had main character energy but forgot he was in a horror movie, not a feel-good sports film. And let's not forget Fred Lors, a bricklayer from New York who would become the most infamous participant for reasons that will blow your mind. This guy turned Olympic cheating into an art form. The international field was rounded out by various other runners who had no idea they were about to participate in what would essentially become a 26-mile episode of Survivor Olympic Edition. 3:03 p.m., the 30th of August, 1904. The starting gun fires, and 32 men begin what would become the most cursed foot race in Olympic history. Within the first few miles, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal marathon. It was going to be a battle for survival. The first major casualty was the course itself. The roads were unpaved and dusty. so every step kicked up clouds of dirt that made breathing feel like inhaling sandpaper. Runners were basically competing in their own personal dust storm, which is about as fun as it sounds. Felix Carvajal, our Cuban mailman hero, decided to make the best of a bad situation by stopping to chat with spectators along the route. This guy was treating the Olympics like a neighborhood fun run, stopping to eat apples from orchards, and even taking a detour to steal some peaches. He literally turned an Olympic marathon into a casual fruit-picking expedition. Meanwhile, the Tijuana runners encountered their first major obstacle, wild dogs. Yes, you read that right. Jan Masciani got chased off the course by a pack of aggressive dogs, losing precious time while trying not to become dog food. This man traveled thousands of miles to compete in the Olympics, only to get bullied by scent. Louis Street Dogs. The heat was already taking its toll. Runners were dropping like flies, with several collapsing from heat exhaustion before even reaching the halfway point. Remember, there was only one water station, so most of these guys were running on fumes and pure stubbornness. Arthur Newton, our overconfident American, was still treating this like a casual jog, maintaining his lead while other runners were literally fighting for their lives. He had no idea that the real chaos was just getting started. By mile 10, this marathon had transformed from a sporting event into something resembling a post-apocalyptic survival scenario. The single water station at mile 12 became like an oasis in the desert, with desperate runners crowding around it like it was dispensing liquid gold. Here's where our star player Thomas Hicks enters the spotlight. His support team had decided that the best way to keep him going was to give him a cocktail of strychnine, literally rat poison, and brandy. Yes, you read that correctly. They were feeding an Olympic athlete rat poison as a performance enhancer. This was their idea of sports science. Hicks was basically running while being slowly poisoned by his own support team. He started hallucinating, his skin turned gray, and he was stumbling around like a zombie. But his trainers kept giving him more poison because apparently they thought if a little rat poison is good, more rat poison must be better. Meanwhile, Felix Carvajal was having the time of his life. After his fruit-picking detour, he decided to take a nap under a tree. This absolute legend was treating the Olympics like a pleasant afternoon stroll, complete with snack breaks and power naps. He woke up refreshed and continued running like nothing happened. The heat was becoming deadly. William Garcia, a runner from California, collapsed and nearly died from heat stroke. His body temperature spiked so high that it took multiple doctors and an ice bath to save his life. This guy literally almost died participating in what was supposed to be a celebration of human athletic achievement. But the most outrageous moment was yet to come. Fred Lors, our bricklayer from New York, had been struggling with cramps around mile 9. So what did he do? He flagged down a passing car and rode for 11 miles before getting out and running the final stretch to the finish line. This man literally Ubered his way through half the Olympics and thought nobody would notice, as runners limped, crawled, and hallucinated their way toward the finish line. The crowd had no idea they were witnessing the most chaotic ending in Olympic history. Fred Lors crossed the finish line first, looking surprisingly fresh for someone who had supposedly just run 26 miles in brutal heat. The crowd went wild. Officials started preparing for the medal ceremony. Lors was posing for photos and accepting congratulations like he just pulled off the greatest athletic achievement of his life. For about 20 minutes, he was the Olympic champion. Then someone snitched. Witnesses came forward saying they'd seen Lors riding in a car for a huge chunk of the race. When confronted, Lors claimed it was all just a joke and that he never intended to actually win. Dude literally tried to gaslight the entire Olympics by saying, "It is just a prank." Bro, Lors was immediately disqualified, and officials had to figure out who had actually won this cursed race. Enter Thomas Hicks, who was barely alive, but technically the first person to run the entire course without cheating. If you don't count the rat poison his team kept feeding him. Hicks crossed the finish line looking like an extra from a zombie movie. He was hallucinating, his skin was gray, and he could barely stand. His support team had to literally carry him across the finish line. This man won the Olympics while being actively poisoned by his own trainers. The medal ceremony was surreal. Hicks stood on the podium looking like he needed immediate medical attention, while officials pretended this was a normal Olympic victory. It was like watching someone receive an award for best performance while dying. In the days following the race, the full scope of this disaster became clear. Thomas Hicks, the winner, spent several days recovering from what was essentially rat poison overdose. His victory was less athletic triumph and more survived attempted murder by support team. Felix Carvajal, our Cuban mailman hero, finished fourth, despite his fruit-picking detours and mid-race nap. This guy literally treated the Olympics like a casual weekend jog and still almost medaled. He became a folk hero for proving that sometimes the best way to handle a disaster is to just roll with it and enjoy the ride. The Swana runners, despite being chased by dogs and dealing with racist treatment from officials, both finished the race. Jan Mashiani came in 9th and Len Tanyan finished 12th. These men traveled across the world, got attacked by animals, and still completed one of the most brutal races in Olympic history. Fred Lors became the poster child for Olympic cheating. His "it was just a joke" defense didn't fly with officials, and he was banned from amateur athletics for life, though the ban was later lifted. And he actually won the Boston Marathon the following year, presumably without any car rides. The race had a 50% dropout rate, with 16 of the 32 starters failing to finish. In modern Olympics, a dropout rate that high would trigger a massive investigation and probably result in criminal charges. In 1904, officials basically shrugged and said, well, that was interesting. Medical experts later analyzed what happened and concluded that it was a miracle more people didn't die. The combination of extreme heat, dehydration, and literal poisoning created conditions that were more dangerous than many actual battlefields. The 1904 Olympic Marathon became a cautionary tale that fundamentally changed how marathons are organized. Modern race organizers look at this event like a horror story, using it as an example of everything you should never do when planning a long-distance race. The water station situation was so obviously insane that it led to immediate changes in marathon standard. Today's races have water stations every few miles, medical teams stationed throughout the course, and strict weather protocols. Basically, everything the 1904 organizers ignored became mandatory safety requirements. The Thomas Hicks rat poison incident became a landmark case in the development of anti-doping regulation. His victory while being fed strychnine highlighted the need for strict rules about what substances athletes could and couldn't use. Modern drug testing exists partly because of this absolute disaster. Felix Carvajal became a legend in Olympic folklore. His casual approach to the race, stopping for snack, chatting with spectators, taking naps, embodied a spirit of sportsmanship that transcended winning and losing. He proved that sometimes the best way to handle an impossible situation is to find joy in the chaos. The race also highlighted serious issues with Olympic organization and athlete safety. The 1904 Olympics were widely criticized as poorly planned and dangerous, leading to major reforms in how future Olympics were organized and managed. Looking back at the 1904 marathon from today's perspective is like watching a historical comedy sketch. Everything about this race violates modern safety standards so completely that it seems like satire. The idea of having one water station for a 26-mile race in 90-degree heat is so obviously dangerous that modern race directors would be arrested for even suggesting it. Today's marathons have water stations, medical tents, cooling stations, and teams of doctors monitoring conditions constantly. The rat poison incident would trigger immediate criminal investigations today. Thomas Hicks's support team was literally poisoning an athlete and calling it training. Modern anti-doping agencies would have a collective heart attack reading about this race. Social media would have had a field day with this event. Imagine the tweets, "Cuban mailman stops for fruit break during Olympics number marathon goals," or "American runner literally hitchhikes through half the race and thinks nobody will notice number Olympic fail." The race has become a popular subject for sports documentaries and historical analyses. It is frequently cited as an example of how far Olympic safety standards have evolved and how important proper race organization really is. And there you have it, folks, the complete story of the most unhinged Olympic event in history. The 1904 marathon had everything: cheating, poisoning, wild animal attacks, hitchhiking, fruit-picking detours, and a winner who looked like he needed immediate medical attention. This race proves that sometimes the most memorable events are the complete disasters. While Thomas Hicks technically won, the real winner was Felix Carvajal, who showed us that you can find joy and humor even in the most impossible situation. The 1904 marathon reminds us that progress often comes from learning what not to do. Every safety protocol in modern marathons exists because someone in 1904 thought, what is the worst that could happen? And then found out, next time you are watching a modern marathon and thinking it looks easy, remember the runners of 1904 who survived rat poison, wild dogs, and heat that could kill you. Today's athletes are basically running in luxury compared to these absolute legends.